Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar Stop Filming Us Again. My name is Kiza Magendane, and it's an honor to be your host today. I work in The Hague as a knowledge broker in the field of international development, and I write for various Dutch news outlets, including NRC De Groene Amsterdam. Today, we are reflecting on the movie Stop Filming Us, a film by the Dutch filmmaker Joris Postema, who followed three Congolese photographers and videographers who wanted to capture their own reality of the DRC and its inhabitant, in Goma to be precise. He asked himself whether he, as a Western filmmaker, would paint an honest picture of that reality. Isn't he reproducing an image, a Western image of Africans? That was the central question of the movie. And in this webinar, we'll go in much more detail on focusing on two central themes. The first theme is how can we decolonize our image of Africa? And the second is the role that Western filmmakers, but also institutions can play to help African filmmakers. To discuss all this, I have Joris himself and other speakers who I will introduce later on. So we have Joris Postema, Babah Tarawally, Isabel, Arande, Fernandez, and also the filmmaker Guido Kleene will be with us later on, hopefully. And at the same time, we have two pre-recorded interviews with the protagonists from Stop Filming Us that we will show. It is important to mention that you can ask your questions in the chat, and I will receive them if they are relevant and present them to the speakers. So without further ado, I will introduce the speakers later, but I think it's good to just start with the scene from the film. And from there, I'll introduce my speakers and ask their take.
Ganza, ouvre la porte en bas.
What happened? Why do they beat him like this?
Et pourquoi vous avez filmé ça?
Yeah, because it happened right in front of me. Yeah, I was quite shocked.
C'est ça le sujet du film, tout ça. Parce que ça, c'est par rapport à ta référence. Automatiquement, tu poses la caméra comme ça, mais un Congolais, pas forcément, va poser sa caméra là-bas. Sur ça.
Pour nous, c'est réaliste. C'est quelque chose qu'on voit chaque jour. Si quelqu'un vole en public, il est corrigé de cette manière. C'est une manière de le corriger. C'est pas...
They kill him. C'est pas corrigé, non?
C'est corrigé. Ça, c'est corrigé. Et puis les définitions des mots et tout, ça dépend de quelqu'un à un autre. Moi, j'appelle ça une correction. C'est parce qu'on l'a battu et puis on l'a relâché. On l'a donné l'occasion de partir.
Toi, tu es choqué parce que tu es occidental. Tu es choqué de vivre cet événement. Jacques n'est pas choqué. Et dans la manière dont toi, tu es choqué, cette pratique-là de frapper les gens, ce n'est pas une pratique qui est venue de l'Afrique ou bien des Congolais. C'est venu depuis l'époque coloniale, à l'époque de King Léopold. au King Leopold, ils ont appris où on frappait, on chicotait les Africains. Un Congolais, quand tu fais quelque chose, on te frappait, on te chicotait. Et ça arrivait à aller au-delà, on te coupait les mains. Et puis nous, ça s'est intégré dans nos mœurs. Et
But
quand
we,
dans nos
we
mœurs,
stopped doing it in Europe now.
non, dans nos mœurs, c'est intégré dans nos mœurs. Et après, en Europe, c'est vrai que ça n'était pas pareil, mais toi qui viens, quand tu le vois, tu es directement choqué. C'est pour cela que j'ai dit, c'est que moi, je suis impatient de voir comment ça va être montré dans les films.
That was the scene, a well-discussed scene. That will also be discussed later on in much more details. To start with, Joris Postema. Joris made his debut in 2013 with the documentary FC Rwanda that premiered at IDFA and then went all over the world. In his documentaries, Joris digs in stories hidden under the surface, as he was trying to do with Stop Filming Us. His second documentary, The Orphanage, premiered also at IDFA in 2016 and was then shown in the cinema. And Stop Filming Us is his most recent project. Joris, so this scene, let me start with what did surprise you during making of the film and afterwards, after the reception? What did surprise you the most?
The reception of the people in Goma, you mean?
I mean the process of making this film in Goma and the whole journey, but also the reception afterwards. What kind of surprises did you encounter in that process?
Like I encountered, I think, a million surprises. There were so many surprises. I think normally when you make a film, you do a lot of research, and you go to, when you start filming, you pretty much know what you want to film. And of course, it's documentary and things change and you have to adapt. But for this film, I decided at some point to stop doing research and to start rolling the camera so things would happen while busy filming, which I could use in the film. So there were surprises every day. It was really organic. We decided every night what we were going to do the next day with Ganza and Teddy Jack, the soundman also, and Ganza, the producer. So there were surprises all the time. And the reception was, some people think it's the worst film ever made. And some people love it, and it's eye-opening, and it's and everything in between. So many surprises.
I hope we dive deep later on those surprises, especially on the research part and the collaboration part, and also on those comments. My second guest is Babah Tarawally, who is a columnist for Trau. He wrote also columns for One World. His most recent book in 2018, Gevangen Zwart-Wit Denken, is about how we can escape from the mechanism that determine our thinking for a long time and to relieve ourselves from the black and white thinking. He also wrote two novels, En God met blauwe ogen, The God with Blue Eyes, and The Verloren Hand, The Lost Hand, a novel about his experiences as asylum seekers, the experience of asylum seekers struggling to overcome their traumas, and also the distinction between the world as we see it and the spiritual world. Babah, welcome.
Thank you.
Did you have the opportunity to see the film?
Yes, I did. I've seen this film for the second time.
And Joris just mentioned that he encountered a lot of surprises, both during the making of the process, but also the reception. What is your first reaction to the scene and what Joris just mentioned?
Yes, I think Joris plays himself as as the subject of research. So I love the way he gave himself to the people. He didn't come there to tell them what to do, as he said himself, that he stopped with all the research. So I love the way he let it go. He allowed the Congolese people there to determine how this film will be made. That is what touches me much. Because I love the way he gave them that freedom of speech, freedom to say anything. And so yes, I admire that a lot. That space letting them own their own space. That is what I really liked about the film.
All right. Thank you, Babah, for that reflection. I just realized that I have to look in the camera, people. So now you can see me. So my next guest is Isabel Arande Fernandez, who has studied film studios from the University of Amsterdam in 1996. She received a master's degree there and then joined ITFA, where in 2012 she became the head of the ITFA Barta Fund. And last year she became deputy director of ITFA in charge of the filmmaking support department. As such, she is also responsible for the ITFA Bertha Fund, as I just mentioned, and oversee the state development programs. She is also a member of the IBF selection committee, actively involved in the mentoring of documentary projects, and regularly participant of consultant in workshops and pitching forums. Isabel, welcome.
Hi.
So what is your first reflection on these themes of decolonizing filmmaking?
Well, I mean, it's a very important subject, and it's very much related to the reason why the ITFA Bertha Fund was started. And what I really find interesting in Joris's film is how he explores this question and enters into this dialogue. I mean, what Babah was just saying with filmmakers and artists in DRC. And I mean, following these three photographers that are so different, where on the one hand, they're trying to make a living, but also aware of what images mean and what you can do with images. I mean, that's a super interesting conversation, and it's a very contemporary conversation that doesn't only apply to filmmaking, but I think is now more and more applying to so many parts of our society. So with that regard, I'm very curious to hear the contributions from the DRC that we're going to see later, to see how they are reflecting on the film that Joris made and what they would do with the material. Because I think this whole dealing with this, it's really, I mean, it's a dialogue, it's a consciousness that needs to start being awakened and needs to start being alive within filmmakers, within the filmmaking industry, but also other arts industries.
Yeah, that's a very good point on the reflection of people in Congo. We'll have a look at that. It's important to mention, I think Joris will explain us why this webinar is about Stop Filming Us Again. It's about that re-edit. But for you, Isabel, I'm curious, maybe for the followers, what does ITFA Bertha Fund does?
Yes.
And I have a follow-up question, but let us start with that.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. Maybe not everybody will know, so I should explain. The ITFA Bertha Fund is an independent fund. So it was started by ITFA, the Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam, but it's a separate organization that acts separately from ITFA. And we operate as a regular film fund, so like the Dutch Film Fund in the Netherlands. The only thing is that we give grants, so financing to documentary projects that are made by filmmakers that are working, living, and from countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Middle East, and still some countries in Eastern Europe. So filmmakers apply to us for a development grant so they can research a film, or later for a production grant so they can start shooting or editing their film.
Exactly. That's why it's very important that you are participating to this conversation. As I mentioned to the followers back home, that in this conversation, the second part will focus more on what we can do as Western filmmakers and institutions. I call myself as we because I live here. Maybe a follow-up question that I had, Isabel, is on, you also mentioned a few minutes ago about how important the subject of decolonization is becoming, also beyond the film industry. Could you give us, because you're also deputy director of ITFA, a bit of perspective of philosophy from the film festival on decolonization, especially related to the emphasis of the fund to support filmmakers in the South?
Well, I mean, I think it's perspective. You already said it. It's all about perspective. From what perspective stories are told, images are produced, and at the basis of or the goal of the ITFA Bertha Fund is exactly that, to offer filmmakers that bring a different perspective and that are living in these countries that we work, so experience the country and their societies in a very different way, give them the opportunity to make their films. We give very small grants, I have to say immediately. It's not huge amounts of money, so we're often only just a little part of a whole production, but the aim of it is to offer a counterbalance to images and films that are produced, financed, and made by filmmakers in the so-called West. So nowadays we can't use that denomination anymore in the Netherlands after the recent news, but let's say European and North American filmmakers that, because of the financing they have available, can very easily go to the DRC, go to Peru, go to India and shoot their films there. But at the start of the idea of the fund was to turn this around, to get these stories told from the inside. But just to go and how this reflects on ITFA, I mean, I can talk about what ITFA is now. Obviously, ITFA has been running for, I think we're up for the edition number 34, so things have changed. It hasn't always been the same.
Also important, Isabel, we are going to dive deep in the second part of that question, especially when we reflect about the role of the so-called West, the denomination that you nuanced. But as I understand you, it's about different perspective and also facilitating those incremental changes, because the fund is quite limited, I understand.
I just want to add one small thing, that saying this as the fund, but also at ITFA, I'm totally aware that we are an organization that is based in the Netherlands and in Amsterdam. So how do we think that we can evaluate or assess that other perspective? And I think what is very important in that, and what you also see reflected in how ITFA is operating, is that you work with people, we work with people that come from all over the world. So it's not only us, the Dutch, or the Dutch that came to live here and are not originally Dutch, that are looking at this, but we work with a broad network of people that also live and work and come from these regions. So that way we also get the different perspectives when we are evaluating films or evaluating projects.
Yeah, that's very nice to hear. Before we go to the second scene, I'd like for you, Joris and Babah, to reflect a little bit on what has been mentioned about how important this conversation of decolonization is becoming. It's becoming current. I don't know the English word. So Joris and Babah, is it sexy? Is the decolonization becoming sexy? And what's the danger of that? To start with you, Joris.
Yeah, I think it's very sexy, and but I think it's still a very important subject, and it's still something that needs to be addressed. And I think, because I completely agree with Isabel and what she said before. If I, as a Western filmmaker, would go to a country like Congo, and I wouldn't know enough about Congo, then the film that I make would probably say more about me and my background than about the people I film or the places I film. And this is really important to address, and also I think for audiences to understand that this is how it works, that the background of the people making the film play a major part in what the film ends up to be.
Great. And Mr. Tarawally, would you say what are the danger of how decolonization is becoming attractive?
Well, there is no danger involved, as far as I'm concerned, because this is a new path the world needs to work. And when I look at what is happening, I see that we don't only need to have the Western ideology being faded away, but we need also the African perspective also to know what is happening in the West. For example, Isabel was talking about how they support filmmakers in Africa, but I would also like to see how filmmakers in Africa, Africans, are also supported to come to Europe to tell the other stories of Europe. and especially the bad stories also. Because we have a lot of things happening in Europe. We have a lot of poverty here. We have a lot of things that are not good. We have corruption. We have a lot of things. So for Africans to have that idea that this corruption is not only African, poverty is not only African, it's also something which is part of the world. Let that story also be told, made by African filmmakers, to be told with their own eyes, and let the Africans also see that this whole Europe we present as if it is the heaven of the world, that it has its own limitations. It has its own dark sides. When those stories are told, then you see decolonization on both sides. So not only giving the idea that it's perfect. So I love in the film when one of the female filmmakers went to ask for subsidy, to be financed to come to Europe, and she said, "I want to bring my own camera people. I don't want to take a Western cameraman or woman. I want to take somebody from Congo to come to Europe to make my own film." That is a very good one, because I see that both stories should be told from both sides.
Yes, you are referring to Bernadette, who will be who we will show the short clip later on.
Yeah.
But as I understand you, Babah, it's about counterbalancing and making sure that Africans are able to also show their image of Europe based on their African experience. That is, I hope we dive on this subject also later on. For now, let's look at the Congolese reflection on Stop Filming Us.
Bonjour Ganza, merci d'être avec nous. Le processus de création de film Stop Filming Us, où vous avez été étroitement impliqué en tant que protagoniste, aussi en tant que producteur, comment était-ce? Comment était-ce de faire le film?
Je pense que c'était intéressant de participer en fait dans la production de la première version du film Stop Filming Us avec le réalisateur Joris, autant plus que les sujets sur lesquels travaillait Joris, c'est un sujet intéressant et ça fait partie du sujet qui nous touche et qui me touche personnellement. Et à travers le travail que nous menons depuis des années au niveau des Goma, où nous sommes beaucoup plus dans une lutte en fait de développer une nouvelle génération de jeunes cinéastes critiques qui peuvent poser des vraies questions sur la question de représentation, sur la dynamique de pouvoir, sur la question de regard. Et du coup, pour moi, j'avais trouvé nécessaire de participer aussi dans le film et donner mon avis qui me semblait juste dans une démarche d'ouverture.
Et l'image qu'il a montrée avec ce film, c'est correct?
L'image que Joris a montrée avec le film, oui, je dirais c'est correct, mais c'est discutable. C'est discutable par rapport au point de vue, par rapport à où lui-même aussi se pose, par rapport aussi à l'histoire.
Et qu'est-ce que tu trouves le plus discutable?
Par exemple, si tu vois l'image dans les films, une des séquences dans les films où on est en train de tabasser un individu dans le marché des Biréré, j'étais sur place et la manière dont, par exemple, ça a été monté lors de la post-production, peut-être moi, je ne le monterai, je ne pourrais pas en fait valider cette montage et cette image. Et d'où ça vient cette pratique, par exemple, de tabasser, de taper les gens? C'est lié aussi à l'histoire. Est-ce que cela est inclus?
Et comment tu allais le faire toi-même? Comment tu allais éditer cette cette scène?
Ben, peut-être moi, si je pourrais éditer cette scène, j'allais aussi vouloir aller un peu plus loin pour comprendre pourquoi on tabassait cette personne et qu'est-ce qu'il est devenu après cette personne. Parce que nous, dans le premier film, on s'arrête juste sur l'image où on tape quelqu'un dans la rue sans pour autant creuser et savoir pourquoi cette personne, on les tabasse, on les tape dans la rue et qu'est-ce que cette personne est devenue après. Parce qu'en gros, tout le travail que nous menons, c'est l'image qu'on veut placé au centre de tout. Et tous les problèmes qui peuvent venir, on doit chercher à tout prix les comprendre.
Vous trouvez que les violences qui sont montrées sont hors de contexte, sont enlevées du contexte, et c'est là qui est en effet un des problèmes dans la vision sur l'Afrique, sur le Congo?
Oui, il y a ça. À chaque fois, c'est ça en fait, ça, les problèmes. Parce qu'on veut raconter l'histoire par rapport au point de vue que nous sommes fixés et par rapport à là où nous, on veut se placer en fait. Donc, c'est ça. Par exemple, ça, cette scène a été utilisée par Joris à la fin. C'était lié à son regard et à son point de vue et aussi à sa connaissance. Mais moi, en connaissant, par exemple, ma région profondément, ma région, et comment est-ce que nous avons grandi et comment nous continuons à vivre les atrocités, les problèmes qui existent, tout en valorisant aussi de belles choses. Au niveau des communautés, je les montrerai autrement, ce que je venais de dire tout à l'heure. Donc, c'est ça. Donc, pour moi, par exemple, je n'allais pas m'arrêter juste sur la scène, on tabasse quelqu'un. J'allais comprendre pourquoi c'est arrivé, pourquoi on l'a tabassé, qu'est-ce qui est devenu cette personne. C'est ça.
Vous avez eu un financement pour faire un re-edit, du film. Vous avez déjà commencé?
On a déjà commencé à chercher, oui, mais on n'a pas encore, avec Duxi, on n'a pas encore eu à mobiliser les fonds à 100%. Donc, c'est toujours en cours, en fait. Donc, la mobilisation des fonds pour la production de la deuxième version est en cours. Par rapport à la deuxième version du film Stop Filming Us, ce qui sera pour nous intéressant, que cette version va nous permettre en fait de se focaliser à relever des questions principales qui aideront les autres générations et les autres organisations à comprendre en fait dans quoi on se lance. Parce que la question de la représentation reste vraiment cruciale et beaucoup de gens sont perdus dedans. Raison pour laquelle nous voulions, à travers la deuxième version du film, que les gens apprennent à travers ces films comment on peut créer un récit colonial, comment est-ce qu'on peut on peut réaliser, on peut écrire d'une manière décoloniale une histoire de quelqu'un tout en se basant sur, tout en ayant une connaissance approfondie de son histoire. Donc ça, c'est plus important. Et aussi, certaines personnes aujourd'hui pensent que parler aujourd'hui de la question de la représentation, c'est aussi être dans les dénis. C'est aussi être dans les dénis, où il faut toujours montrer que tout va bien, alors qu'il y a des choses qui ne vont pas forcément bien. Par exemple, à l'est du Congo, actuellement, là, on est en train de parler, il y a beaucoup de choses qui se passent au niveau des Béni, à l'est de la République démocratique du Congo. Il y a des soulèvements, il y a l'insécurité qui continue. Mais vouloir aussi parler sur ces questions, ce n'est pas aussi être dans les dénis de dire que ça n'existait pas. Donc, c'est de voir aussi à travers cette version comment est-ce qu'on peut créer une image positive, mais qui ne rentre pas dans les romantiques.
OK, on attendra avec impatience cette deuxième version. J'ai une question. Quel rôle des pays comme les Pays-Bas, leur gouvernement, leurs fonds, leur industrie audiovisuelle, devrait-il jouer dans le développement des films africains, de vos films, de votre industrie cinématographique?
Moi, je pense le rôle que les Pays-Bas, particulièrement parce que vous venez un peu de citer les Pays-Bas et peut-être ça peut les autres pays peuvent jouer, c'est comment est-ce que tous ces pays restent à l'écoute, restent à l'écoute et appuyer déjà des dynamiques existantes, en fait, des dynamiques existantes qui savent très bien ce qu'ils font et qui ont une connaissance profonde de leur propre histoire. Je pense que cet accompagnement et ce travail en coopération s'avère indispensable.
And here we are discussing Stop Filming Us Again. Joris, it's called this webinar Stop Filming Us Again because, as we just learned, there is a new edit coming on of your film, also given the subject of your film. Can you give us an understanding of what is happening?
Yeah, the film was screened in Goma at the Congolese International Film Festival in the summer, and the audience, they were asking if they could have all the material and make their own version of it. For us here to see what they think the audience is important for us to see, and together with Doxy, the producer, and Ganza, the producer there, we started to get the financing done, and we're almost there. I think I'm not really part of these conversations, but I think we need a little bit, but we've come a long way, and I think they're about to start editing a complete new version, and I'm really excited about it, and I would really like to see how this film turns out to be.
Because your excitement has to do with the question whether someone, a local, as Ganza explained, understanding the local dynamics and historical context, will come up with a different conclusion or image, a selection of image.
Yeah, for sure they will. I think Bernadette is going to edit the film. I'm not sure if that's really true, but I think this is the latest information I have. And for sure, she's gonna make some complete different decisions as I have made.
Yeah, maybe to come back to the point that you made, Joris, and I'm curious to hear Babah and Isabel perspective. You said you went with an open perspective and you tried to collaborate with the locals. One of the criticism will be that, yeah, that Minir Postma is just a privileged guy who, without any local understanding, just comes. And for what is interesting for him is not necessarily interesting for the locals. So you will get not a complete image of the local reality. What will be your take on that?
Yeah, I understand the criticism. And when I say I stopped researching, I did a lot of research before that. And it's not like people like Ganza or Bernadette or Mugabo want to spend time with me and talk to me if they think I'm not genuinely interested or if I really don't know anything. I mean, they have very strong, active people, and they would send me away if I was not interested enough. So I don't agree with the criticism, obviously, as I'm the filmmaker. But I think it's a bit too easy sometimes, this criticism.
So it's really about being open and communicating this with the people that you work with, as I understand.
For this film, yes. I cannot talk for any other films, but for this film, I think this was the right way to do it.
Yeah. And Babah, you mentioned that this was the strength of the film, the fact that Joris was open and collaborated with his local counterparts. You just listened to Ganza, one of the local counterparts and also a protagonist, critical based on his Congolese perspective. What is your reflection on his commentary? By the way, for people home, it's important to mention that Guido will not make it. That is a shame, but on the other hand, it gives us the opportunity to discuss even in much more details. So for you, Babah, what is your take on this criticism?
The gaze of the order is always present. Even me, living in the West for a long time, when I go back home to Sierra Leone, where I'm from, my gaze is different. In as much as I know the context, but I see things with a different perspective. When I see somebody lying on the street, like I saw when I was in Sierra Leone in January, a poor man lying on the street, it touches my attention. While the other people, the passengers I'm sitting with, they don't care. They see that person lying down as part of them. For me, it touches me. I start asking questions. Who is this guy? Why is he lying down there? Where is he from? Is it that nobody cares? But because I've been out of that system for a long time, when I go back, I see things that the local people don't see. So gaze will never die out. The thing is that the genuineness, the sincerity, the honesty, that is what also Joris talk about. If he is very honest and very interested, which I saw in the film, that he puts his Western knowledge of I know it all at the back seat and allow the people to say what they think. And he allows himself to learn. I find it very much interesting because I've seen other Western interventions wherein they come in and they know it all. So that is my reflection on yours. You can't take away that other gaze. It will always be there. So let's be very sincere about that. And that is the reason why I said in the beginning, it's also very important that Africans also have the opportunity to come to Europe to have that other gaze. So when we have both sides, then we have a balance.
Yeah, very important point on balance. Babah, what will be your criticism on the film so far?
My criticism of the film, will be that that it is much more too broad. Too broad. All the gazes, all the people involved, everybody has a say, and it makes it more. It was for me not very much focused on one point and then go through it. Like one filmmaker following that story of that filmmaker or one person in the film. I should have loved that. Perhaps it's my way of looking at it. But it was more giving access to almost all voices, which of course is it can be good. But it makes that, for example, why the whole criticism about this guy who was beaten, why it came on board, because it was very broad. If I was a filmmaker, I have a choice. That scene, I'll just skip it because it's not the scene I'm looking at. But it gives us a very broad gaze, which makes it sometimes difficult to really follow everything together.
Okay, so with not being very broad, there will be a space to go maybe in much more deep. So it's more a criticism on the storytelling. I think Joris, I don't know whether you want to say anything on that, because I can imagine it's sometimes good to receive, you are muted, to receive a criticism based on your content and not on all the other things around it.
No, but it's storytelling wise, it's a very complicated film. Even for me, it's very complicated. Also to edit it was really difficult, and to give a little bit of context about the scene of the fighting, what was happening actually was Mugabo, one of the protagonists of the film, was making a film to show his city, the way he looks at his city, and we were filming the same things he was filming. And what happened was that this beating was going on, and I immediately took my phone and started filming it. And Mugabo just walked past it and went on with what he was doing. So the scene is in it to show really a different of perspective. That to me it was like, wow, violence! I need to film it. And for him it was like, oh yeah, I've seen it every day. It's not necessarily, this is not how I want to show my city. Which of course it's his right to do it. It's it was his film. So this is why the scene is in it, and but I agree with Babah a little bit. It's quite, there's a lot happening in film. Yeah, that's sure.
So it means you make yourself vulnerable, Joris, by putting that. So it's not that you want to show the image, but you want to show how your Western girls influence your choices and the criticism that you receive, as I understand.
Yeah, exactly. And also what really made me think was that I was reflecting on it later, that if somebody would ask me to make a little film about Amsterdam, my city, I wouldn't go to a coffee shop. I wouldn't go to the red light district because I'm never there. And I know they're part of the city, but everybody else would do that coming abroad. I would show the Noorder Park or whatever places that I really like and that I would like to show in a film that I would make about the city. And this is just what Mugabo is doing. So he's not ignoring it. He's not making a point that everything is going well in his country. He's just showing his city the way he wants to portray it, which I think is beautiful. And this is all what the scene was about.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Babah's call for counterbalancing the image, bringing Mugabo to Amsterdam is a very good call.
It would be fantastic.
Isabel from ITFA maybe has some fun, but Isabel, I'm curious, can you tell us, can you give us your reflection? Because you also mentioned the importance of perspective, also what you want to reach with the Bertha Fund, the criticism of that we just saw from Ganza, and the reflection of Babah and Joris. What is your take?
I mean, I think Joris just explained why that scene is in the film, because it's part of the whole question and discussion that he's wanting to raise with the film. So in that sense, it works very well because it's being mentioned very often as an example. There was actually one other part of the film, which is like just one small shot where I also thought, oh, wow. And that's when you follow the Dutch lady of the UN that goes to the warlord. And my first, when you start seeing this, like this broader scene, and you see all these guys with guns. I mean, I come from a country where there was a dictatorship, so I immediately, oh yeah, guns. But then you look at how people are reacting around it, and they act, I mean, there's nothing going on. Yeah, they're carrying around with guns, but it's daily life. And then in that sequence, at one point, there is one, and it's like very short, it's a few seconds, close up of a big gun, which for me very much reflected the experience of that I initially was feeling of foreigners being there, and the first reaction of not being used to the guns is like, whoa, guns scary. So that's why suddenly you get in the edit this close-up of the gun, while at the same time, if you just evaluate what was happening there that you see through the other shots, nobody had a problem with the guns. I mean, they always carry around the guns. It's as if they carry around, I don't know, a bottle of water or something. So I found that also, yeah, that struck me when I watched the film the other day. But no, I mean, I think exactly what, you know, it's also, in a way, it's also about, I guess it's also about audiences and being and having a certain, or being taught or teaching yourself a certain media literacy, because also with regard to what Ganza is saying with the beating scene, if you would edit this in a different way, where first you hear about the tradition of how it was in colonial times and who was hitting who then, and then you see the scene in the street, you would probably also make different meaning of it. So it's I mean, and it's also, and I guess that's also a role that I think we could say that organizations or institutions or broadcasters that screen films also have in, when programming and curating, making those choices where you show stories, you show images that also challenge an audience,
yeah,
to understand things differently, or to see something that surprises them instead and challenges their views. Because in the end, if we look at I mean, if we consider in this case like a Dutch audience or a European audience, where do you get your information and your images from? From what you see in television, what you read in the newspaper. So it's, everything is coming from one specific perspective, and then that's the only thing the audience has to build their ideas on. I mean, it goes even back to what they're teaching kids in school. The discussion that we're having here in the Netherlands, is the colonial past taught enough, and taught enough from a different perspective? So with that regard, I mean, if I look at the whole discussion that we're living here in the Netherlands with regard to decolonization, what Babah is saying, I mean, I find it exciting getting somebody from one of the former colonies to come to the Netherlands to make a film about the colonial history through that perspective. Yes, please. I mean, because it's challenging. I mean, that's what we need to really get, because you know what you were asking earlier, is it becoming how do you, I don't remember
sexy.
What, sexy yes, it is. And you know that we have all these institutions and organizations that are questioning themselves, and I really encourage that, and I think it's good. But to really challenge the establishment, you need that other perspective. You need those outside, those peoples that were the ones that suffered the most, to come and tell their stories. That's how you get a real dialogue going, an interesting dialogue, I think.
Yeah, that's really a very important point, actually, because you are saying we should not only look at the filmmakers, but at the whole institutions, and also the role of the consumer. You are talking about literacy, so that's a very good point. Talking about Babah, he writes a column for Trouw, and I think he actually does what he is already talking about. So Babah, for you, that question that Isabel just raised, how can we educate the Western consumers to decolonize the perspective of looking at the other side of the world, especially Africa and Congo in this case?
Well, I think we've said a lot about it. I think coming closer to each other is very important. Coming closer and not keeping the gap very small. Because when you have this broader gap, and that is one of the things I find very interesting, how the Congolese, we are not afraid of Joris. Did you have him high with respect? No. In fact, they were telling him, come and sit, the way you are sitting. They had this conversation. I really enjoyed it. This balance. And Joris is just an epitome of that. This is how the Western gaze should be able to subside, by not being the one who thinks you know all. That you give space for other voices. You keep your own supremacy, in a sense, back, and allow others to come in. Give space to others. I think I just want to say something like, when I work at the Utrecht Central Station, I don't know whether other people have it, other Black people have it, but whenever I walk to the Utrecht Central Station, I see beggars there. They always come to me to ask for money. I don't know other people have that. They always come to me as a Black man. They think I have empathy to give money. Of course I give money. But sometimes I just think, why you always choose me? And these are white beggars. These are white people who are begging on the street. And when I send this type of picture to my family in Africa to see a white man begging me money, and I'm giving that money to that white person, they think, wow, is that possible? So you see where I'm coming from. If my mother can see that I'm giving a white man money because he doesn't have a home, it changes her perception of this whole hierarchy of, that the West is there and we are here. It is about humanity and how we come closer to each other, give each other the space, allow other voices to come in. Then I think we build that bridge of harmony and connection. And then this whole knowledge of understanding each other becomes easier, And I would like to talk about bilateral help and all these things, because when you give money to African countries, you say, okay, we are the one giving you the money, and we need expectations. That is what needs to stop. Expecting. You cannot give filmmakers money and you want them to make the film the way you want it. No, you have to give them that freedom. Not expect.
I think you are building a bridge already to the second subject, Babah. And also on the development cooperation, as it's called, that's also a subject worth discussing. But if I understand you, it is really about bridging gaps, showing different stories, and creating this base of humanity. And Joris, and there's nothing as powerful as changing the perception as storytelling, whether it's books, literature, art, of course, and film, especially when it's come to image formation. For people in the back home, please ask your questions to the audience, especially if you're a filmmaker and you want to learn how you can engage yourself in telling stories from another part. Joris, as I mentioned, there is nothing powerful in changing and educating, creating this literacy as film. And I assume that's why you became a filmmaker. That's why you tell complicated story, as I introduced in the bio, the things that lay under the surface. I hope, at least I assume, that with your film, you're trying to educate the audience. So I just assume it was the case. Would you say you succeeded in that process?
It was the case. I really I thought it was really important to tell this story and to educate people. Sounds a little bit pretentious always, but really to start a discussion or to prolong a discussion or to help in a discussion. And there have been a whole lot of discussions. So I think quite a lot has been said about the film. I've been in many Q&As and debates with lots of NGOs, for example, Western NGOs, which I think was really good, because there's also some work to do there, I think. So yes, I think in that sense, the film really did its job.
And just for filmmakers following us, Joris, because the central question is whether you are able, as a Western filmmaker, to tell this story. I think if you follow the film, you have an answer, and it's a question, a discussion that continues. Would you make another film about a distant country, an African country, or the Congo?
Maybe I would, but I would do it differently for sure. I'm not saying that only people from DRC can make films in DRC, or only people from Holland can make film in Holland. I don't think that's the case at all. But I do believe two things. The first, if you go to another country, you should be very well informed, better than I was, I think, if I would make a different topic. A lot better. And also that it's really important, but I think everybody stressed that already here, that we start watching films made by people from DRC, for example, and really do our best to understand them, because sometimes I find them difficult to watch because there's a different kind of context and different kind of storytelling. And it's important that we try and that we really start watching those films and really try to understand the perception of filmmakers from Congo or whatever other country.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the person responsible for showing those films is Isabel. Could you maybe follow up on that point?
Well, I can only agree with Joris. I think it's very important, but that's also what with the festival, what we aim for. There are many film festivals all over the world, and most of them have the word international in their name. Well, the idea is to be truly international, and not international only meaning Europe and North Africa, because I also think that's not interesting. And how we look at the programming and the films we're selecting for IDFA is really with that idea in mind, to show films from all over the world. North, south, east, and west. So, and yes, that leads to, what Joris also already saying. Some films I find more difficult to see or to understand. But curating a program, be it a film program or an arts program, is very much about finding the balance, and in that balance, also looking for the ways where you can present things to your audience that they're not used to seeing, but lure them in to go and see that and to learn and to enlighten themselves because they're watching something that is new to them or that is challenging to them. But and obviously as a festival, I think, because in the end, I think it's also in this discussion, it's very important not to forget that unfortunately filmmaking is also an economical business. And as a festival, in the curating of films, we have a certain liberty to show those films that might not be mainstream or might be more difficult for an audience. But in the end, we are only a small platform showing films compared to television, to streaming platforms. So, and they are dealing with a much more commercial context and requirements and expectations, and thus have less liberties or take less liberties. It's also a decision that people make, and have to screen more mainstream films, for example. But yeah. There's one other thing I just wanted to stress here when we were earlier, when Babah and Joris were talking about filmmaking and who has the right to make what film. I think it's very important also in this to make a distinction between filmmaking in the sense of filmmakers like what Joris is doing, the films that Movies That Matter is showing or that are being shown at IDFA, so creative films where that perspective and gaze is super important of the author, but it's very different from a reportage. And there, if we look at the news and the reportage and the more quick images that we're constantly being fed all the time, where there is no space for going deeper into subjects, I think those are also is a source that very much determines the image that we have, for example, from Africa. And there, what happens? News, who's making those reportage? What do they focus on? I think there that question of that you do notice that fight or that beggar in the street, becomes super relevant because it's somebody not coming from that context, coming from another world. So in your reporting, you focus on that. And if you would let a local journalist make that news report, it would probably be very different what the images are that we're receiving.
Yes, I'm happy you bring this question, but it relates to the point that I wanted to ask you, Isabel. It's about the distinction between cinema, as you describe, and the broader films, and the role of education, as you mentioned, because I understand when it comes to creating empathy, bringing people to a different world, it becomes rather an elite, people who visit these kind of festivals. I assume this is one of the challenges that we face in our society, is that the film that the one Joris is making and the efforts that we are investing will not reach the broader audience. When we talk about decolonization, how should we deal with this divide, with the elite on one hand being able to access these films and the broader audience where we feel like we're actually making efforts that will never reach them, to just think in a distinction?
Yeah, I wish I had the answer to that question. I mean, yeah, how can I guess maybe the way collaborations, because as you're saying, with ITFA, for example, and with Movies That Matter, you reach a specific audience, the elite, maybe obviously also some part of the, not elite, but what is underneath that, but it is a special type of audience, and it doesn't have the same reach as Netflix or as just the NPO, the Dutch broadcasters, for example. And I think that, but ITFA is not the only organization showing films. Exactly. I mean, there are also other cultural institutions working with these subjects and trying to change something. So yeah, with that regard, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's about collaborations. It's also, I mean, I also think it's important for institutions like ITFA, but also other institutions that are really like, how you would say, established and stable, because they have financing, for example, from the government, and not to really be constantly questioning this also and be open to collaborate with smaller organizations that can bring in different audience, different perspectives, different curators, and not only restricted to the usual suspects or the people you always work with. But I don't think this is really a proper answer to your question. But
I know it's a difficult question. Yeah, and the question is whether you would want to, but we have a filmmaker here, Joris. Very short before we go to the next clip from Bernadette. We are talking about education. Your film is rather limited to these kind of prestigious festivals. When you talk about decolonization and the importance of educating the mass, do you see it as your role to also reach the audience of Hart for Nederland?
I would love for them to see it, but this is very difficult to achieve. You know, it's been broadcasted, of course, on NPO, and then it goes on at 11 in the night, and I think maybe 100,000 people watch the film, which is not a lot, I think. And then pretty much for big audiences, it's finished. He's been screened in a lot of festivals, and it will appear on Al Jazeera. So they have the worldwide rights. So many people, I hope, will see it there. But the Hart van Nederland population, whoever they are, I don't know how to reach them. It's really difficult.
Yeah, I can imagine. So let us go to Bernadette, who has the ambition to portray the city of Amsterdam, where Joris lives.
Bernadette Vivuya, enchantée. Merci d'être avec nous. Vous êtes l'une des protagonistes du film Stop Filming Us. Est-ce que l'image que Joris a montrée dans son film, par rapport à l'image de la RDC et le rôle ambigu de l'Occident, est-elle correcte?
Son film, c'est parmi les films qui racontent le mieux donc la réalité sur place. Bien qu'il y a encore quelques petites choses qui, normalement, ça devait être changé. parce que de la façon où ça a été raconté, ça crée un peu la confusion. Au lieu de voir cette approche de décolonisation que je voulais mettre en avant, donc plusieurs personnes se sont surtout penchées sur cette question d'une femme qui est sous-représentée dans le monde audiovisuel. Parce que, bon, le film a circulé dans le monde et je reçois des feedbacks, mais c'est toujours lié à cette sous-représentation de la femme dans ce monde audiovisuel. Donc, cette question pour laquelle j'ai milite n'a pas été beaucoup éclairée. C'est pas étonnant que les gens un peu se focalisent sur ce côté où il y a la femme qui est qui n'a pas encore gagné sa place, un peu comme ça. Parce que déjà, vers le début, l'introduction, pour moi, donc par exemple, c'est la femme qui intervient, mais avec une position de faiblesse.
Par rapport au film, hein, vous allez maintenant faire un remontage du film. Quelle scène choisiriez-vous dans votre propre montage pour montrer vraiment une image différente?
C'est surtout ce côté de lier cette histoire, donc cette lutte de travailler sur une image positive, par exemple, d'une région. On ne peut pas en parler sans connaître l'histoire. Donc, si une fois on s'est dit pourquoi il y a cette image négative qui a beaucoup été véhiculée à travers le monde, il faut comprendre d'abord comment, avant de faire une image positive, il faut comprendre d'abord pourquoi cette image négative, comment cette image négative est née. Et dans ce deuxième film, donc, dans ce remontage, c'est donner un peu la place à cette histoire, ce processus de la décolonisation. Les protagonistes qui sont suivis dans le film, on ne les montre pas juste comme des gens qui sont au travail en train de militer pour cette réécriture de l'image du Congo, mais on voit aussi dans leur vie pour comprendre c'est qui est cette personne-là et d'où est née cette envie de vouloir changer les choses. Donc,
merci. Et une de ces femmes, c'est aussi vous-même, je pense. Et vous venez de réaliser récemment un nouveau film, et je pense que dans le documentaire, on en parle aussi. Pouvez-vous expliquer comment vous avez pu finaliser le film? Dans le documentaire, vous avez cherché le financement. Est-ce que vous avez pu tourner en Belgique?
Bon, jusque-là, non. Et donc, ce film, ouais, c'est tout un processus donc, comme quand je parlais de la décolonisation. Et c'est vrai qu'il y a certaines personnes qui commencent à me contacter pour que finalement que je réalise ce film. Mais jusque-là, il n'a pas encore été financé à un degré où je me dis c'est maintenant temps de le réaliser.
Quel rôle des pays comme le Pays-Bas, le gouvernement, les fonds, l'industrie audiovisuelle, quel rôle devrait-il jouer dans le développement de vos films et de votre industrie cinématographique?
Donc, c'est de voir un peu les initiatives locales et de les appuyer. Donc, il faut qu'il y ait une justice même dans les financements. Donc, miser sur les points de vue locaux pour donner une vraie réalité sur place. Je peux aborder ça, par exemple, sur la question coloniale. Donc, il y a donc des œuvres qui ont été financées parlant du Congo, mais c'est parce qu'il y a eu plein de gens qui sont venus de l'extérieur pour venir les raconter ces histoires. Et donc, quand j'ai parlé de justice, donc donc, si une fois vous voulez venir raconter l'histoire de l'Afrique, donc si vous êtes intéressé à raconter l'histoire de l'Afrique, normalement, il faudra trouver des gens qui sont locaux parce qu'ils connaissent la réalité sur place. Et donc, la justice, c'est de voir si vous amenez quelqu'un Donc, si vous êtes intéressé par la thématique sur place et amener quelqu'un d'autre qui ne maîtrise pas le terrain aussi, c'est pas intéressant. Donc, misez sur, si vous voulez vraiment les histoires parlant de l'Afrique, alors il faut miser sur les Africains parce qu'eux, ils maîtrisent mieux leur continent, leur vie et leurs mœurs.
Merci beaucoup pour l'entretien. Nous aimerons vraiment voir votre film et je vous encourage et j'espère vraiment de voir votre film dans le prochain festival.
Here we come to the last part of this conversation. Before we actually reflect on what we can do as Western institutions and individuals to support filmmakers like Bernadette, I would like to start with a very simple question because we have an expression in Dutch that says "Wie betaalt bepaalt," who pays decides. For you, Isabel, do you think that countries like the Netherlands and actors within should play a role to support independent filmmakers in a country such as Congo?
Well, yes, I mean, that's what we do. I have to say that the IDFA Bertha Fund, we've been running for 22 years. In the first 15 years of the fund, we were funded by the Ministry of Development Aid, Ministerie van Ontwikkelingssamenwerking, so as part of the Dutch foreign policy. But this stopped when the Dutch foreign policy changed and the Ministry of Development Aid became a Ministry of Development Aid and Trade. And since then, we have no Dutch funders. We are funded outside of the Netherlands, partly by the EU, the European Union, but the main part comes from a private funder, a philanthropist, not based here, but based in the UK. So, you know, I mean, I think, yes, of course, I think that should happen, but it's also very complicated. I mean, if you look at the French history with Francophone Africa and the financial dependency that was created when the when the colonies became independent, and that is still there up until today. I think in each African capital, there's a French institute that does very good things, but also there's always this return that comes with it. So the moment when you create these financial liaisons, streams, and you're sending money somewhere or giving money, power relations come into play. There is a disbalance. So when doing this, and I guess that's also, I mean, going back to Joris mentioned earlier, the NGOs and how these operate and the story. I mean, we've all heard stories about that and how that works and how money is put into policies that are written in an office somewhere in Europe and that have nothing to do with the situation locally, and you need to get targets. So the moment you do this, so create these financial streams or financial support, for me, with that comes along, like equally, is that consciousness of what does this mean with regards to power relations, what you were just saying, the Dutch saying, who pays decides. I mean, why are you doing this? Why is the purpose? And our standpoint has always been that we never, how do you say that, have any creative power over the films we support. When filmmakers ask for help because they're stuck in their editing or in their story or need creative support, we try to give that to them. But in doing this, we also look for mentors, so more experienced filmmakers that come also from other continents, so that you have, again, that different perspective and you can reach at least that you know, that area where there's a common language of cinema, and where you're coming from doesn't really play a role. But sometimes we also go wrong in there, and then it needs to be corrected. So yes, I think there is a role to play with regards to financing, because the world is an unequal place, because it turns out that there are some continents where there is more money, but no strings attached.
Yeah. So we are really connected, and it's about those who are privileged enough to have the funding to also take responsibility, I understand, but at the same time comes power relation with. For you, Joris, a very simple question. Should Western institutions and individuals support local filmmakers in countries such as Congo?
Yeah, I think they should, but I agree with Isabel that it's really difficult to do it with regard to these power relations, and also because it's very often intrinsic, so you don't really understand all these relations exactly. So in a way, it should be the people in Holland or Europe should help, but it should somehow be done locally. And how to do that, I don't really know. But the decision should be made by people from DRC, for example, because they understand the context, they understand the plans, the film plans they are reading, and they.
Joris, I like the fact that you go in the how. That I really like that, because I would like to end with that. I was just curious whether you think we should support, but you say the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Okay, and for you, Babah Tarawally, you are right, and I think in your field it's the same actually struggle. It's the same question on how can you support, especially thinking about the audience who is consuming this film. So for you, the same question: do you think that we have a responsibility here in the Netherlands to support filmmakers like Bernadette?
Yes, I think for me, I'm not against support. But when you support, you give money, then you expect something back. I have problem with that expectation. You know, it is the best when you give out without expecting. Then miracles happen. You know, but in the West, we've seen, even with the bilateral help we give to African countries, we need something back. Whether it be businesses or what else, minerals, we need something back. So in the cultural arts form, I think we should be more doing good without expecting. So let me just make an example. Like Congo, unfortunately, Congo has been one of the victims of development assistance failure, because Congo is portrayed to be the heart of Africa. So most of the stories from Congo is just spread over the whole African continent, which of course there are a lot of other stories in other corners of African continent which are not being told. Looking from a writer's perspective, you know, like we have Chimamanda Adichie. We all know this Nigerian writer, wonderful writer, Chimamanda Adichie. She only writes about the elite in Africa, people who have made it. You know, all her stories are about success stories, about the elite, people who have money, who have big wealth. You know, so some Western people in the beginning, they had problem with it. They had problem reading her books because she's not portraying the Africa they are used to see. You know, the Africa of poverty. You know, they are not used to it. But now she has become a house name. You know, so things can change. So let's diversify. Let there be the story should be diverse. You know.
Okay, Babah, as I understand you, because it was a simple question, you are saying yes, we should support, but on a condition. And I've heard three conditions. Isabel said yes, support, but be aware of the historical context and the power relations. Joris said yes, we should support, but think about take the local context into account and reflect on who should decide. And you're actually saying we should support, but don't expect anything in return. I would like to go much deeper in this.
Let me just add. Let me add something to that before you round up.
Another condition, yes, please.
Well, the condition is that I want African countries also to take responsibilities. The African government, they should put art and culture high on the agenda. They don't give money. They don't put money into culture. They put less money. It's just 0.001% they put into culture. So they need to take the lead in this. And when they do that, then there will be a balance. Because coming back to this balance, you know, we don't only ask the West to give money, but we have African countries also. The government of Congo should support culture and art. Thank you.
I can't agree more. And I think it's about economics. If you have to invest in primary education or feeding your people, I understand why governments take certain responsibility, and then come the questions, what can we do as rich countries? Before we go in much more details on how you can support local, there is a question for you, Isabel, from Bert, who asks that in the Netherlands, we have peer reviews on how to select programs. And Bert wonders whether you work with local peers to review your project.
I assume Bert means locals in the countries where we work. Yes, we do. And also, I mean, this has also been for us, as I said, we've been operating for 22 years. This wasn't something that we did from the beginning. But over the last 10 years, we have changed our selection processes, but also the collaborations we have with filmmakers with regards to consultancies or working with mentors. So now we always, it's like half. And it's not only European. I mean, it can also, we work in 5 different continents. So it's really a spread also with regards to the peers or the professionals we ask to assess our project.
Yeah, I think that's also related to a point that has been made by the 2 protagonists about taking the local context, what Joris was also mentioning, actually attuning to what is there in place and taking the history into account. We are going toward the end of this program. So far, I have learned that it is important to indeed think about the gaze and the perspective that we take, that our background define what we see. But also, when thinking about rebalancing the image, we should not exaggerate, but try to tell complete stories. And that's where the role of local filmmakers come. And I understood that you all 3 agree that we have a role to play. Western filmmakers, institutions, broadcasters, markets, consumers, all have the role to play. Starting with you, Isabel, what can we concretely do to support people like Bernadette?
Well, I was just thinking of it. I mean, it might be good to know that already for many years now, there was the start for an initiative to start a Pan-African Film Fund, there was a huge review done, which was funded by private funders in the US. And now there's an organization called DOCA, D-O-C-A, which started, I think, last year or maybe the year before, and is operating as a fund based in Nairobi, supporting filmmakers from all over. As far as I know, they're funded through foreign donors like Ford Foundation or Open Society, the OSF. So there is an initiative there, for example, who is doing this and who's in a way doing similar work as what we do with the ITFA Bertha Fund. They're only aimed at documentary. I think it's twofold. On the one hand, of course, there is what we can do, like the work we're doing with ITFA Bertha Fund and ITFA, but I also think I really liked what Babah brought up about Chimamanda Adichie and the Nigerian elite and middle class. We see so little images and stories of the middle class, for example, people that live a life like we do. They are there, they exist in Africa, like they exist in Latin America, like they exist in the poor Asian countries, but we hardly ever see it. So I think it's also, again, going back to media literacy, that there's also a responsibility within not only funding filmmakers and artists, but also in all the other images that are produced that take us to the other parts of the world, of having a broader view of what you show, what you film, what news items there are, and showing also this other side of societies. Because what somehow, and I think that is the beauty of film, and particularly of documentary film, that filmmakers are able to tell stories that even if they are set on the other side of the world, but because it's human stories, you find that common point where an audience here can relate. I can relate to a woman like me living in Nigeria that has 2 children, and I don't know what her problems are, because it's the human nature. I mean, and we need more of those images as well, because that brings people together and also changes your view and understanding of other countries and other cultures.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So for you, Joris, you were about to break down how we can help local uh, local filmmakers. What will be your contribution? Also, because of this film, I think you've had some reflections on how we can help people like Bernadette to share their stories.
First, a quick reaction to Isabel. It's quite funny that a lot of critique on Stop Filmmakers has been that the protagonists of the film are elite and middle class, and so not representative of Goma. And why should we take it seriously? So it's really funny. It's true what you're saying, Isabel. I think. First of all, I think as a filmmaker making a film in an African country or an Asian country, now let's speak for myself. I'm very much used to do the research, go there, fly there, talk to people, write here, and have it all under control. And it could be done very differently. And I think this is what Ganza and Betty are both saying in the clips we just saw in the interviews. Work together, but then not just think of it all, then fly there to whatever country and say what you want to do, but really actively engage with people from the country you're going to, of the region you're going to, so you get a different perspective already from the beginning. I think this is really important, but I don't think this is exactly what you're referring to. And about the funding, I don't really know. I think it's really sad that Bernadette still didn't make the film, and she only needs $10,000. I mean, it's not a lot of money for a filmmaker in Holland, and still she doesn't get it. And I think it's really important to see her film about neo-colonization in Congo. This is what the film is about. And we should help. And I totally agree with Babah. It has to be without expectations. So we should, in a way, create some kind of fund that doesn't have those expectations. But then I come back to what I was saying before. Then it's also really important who does the selecting, who's reading the plans, who's going, who can say this is interesting, this is not interesting. This is already deciding factor. If the wrong people are doing this, again, her film would not make it. So this, I don't know how to do that. It's not my profession. I'm just a filmmaker. But this is, I think, something we should really get into and think about.
Yeah, it really relates to the point that Isabel was making about power relations, both historical and that's the one who is on the decision-making table. Yeah. For you, Babah, what can we concretely do to support filmmakers in the so-called global South or Africa or Congo?
I think for Bernadette, we should, from here, also from the diaspora point of view, we should be able to make crowdfunding. We should crowdfund, not only depend on the, on Isabel, but we should have an alternative way of creating fund for this type of filmmakers to be able to come here and do their filming, and because we also want these stories to be told, and so I think that can be a very good way also to create funding for her. And for the rest, I've said a lot about how it is important that these voices are heard. And I think, just like what Joris said, who are the ones choosing? What are the conditions? And how should those who are from the Western perspective, how can they liaise with people from the other side to make these decisions? That you don't only make this decision as a Western person, giving the conditions to how the African film should look like, but also perhaps in collaboration with those critical voices also in Africa to join together to see how these conditions can be set. This is just an idea, because I just have the feeling that when we make choices from here, most of the time our gazes are different, and you can only go over that when you collaborate with other filmmakers from other perspectives, so that they also can be able to iron out that decision making and not leave it just one-sided, because sometimes it can be injustice. Just because you see it a different way doesn't mean that's the way the African people want to see it. Because when Bernadette will come here. The audience for her is the audience in Congo. What do they want to see? Not the audience in Holland. So these are things we should sort out.
Yeah. I think the broad theme today is about consciousness and counterbalancing. And hopefully from today, for people with money following, they can join Babah so that he can bring people from Sierra Leone to film how the Netherlands is. Of course, you can read Babah's column. I really learned a lot today. It's really about knowing our gaze, our perspective, being open to the other collaboration, but at the same time being aware of the power relations, the historical context, and also taking actually tuning on the what is there. And I think Corona has showed us that it is indeed possible. We don't have to make 3 travels to Congo, as Joris mentioned, to make a beautiful story. We can work with the local elite or the middle class who also know their context. Before we close, we have like 2 minutes. Last reflection. What would be your advice for a Dutch filmmaker who, like Joris, would be interested in telling a complicated story? I will start with you, Joris, as you are an ervaringsdeskundige. What would be your advice for someone who is 22 and is wants to tell a story about Congo or another place in Africa?
Yeah, I find it very difficult to advise other filmmakers. I think they should find their own way. But I think what there was this saying, I hope I still remember it, by Anne Isnin. She's a writer, and she said something like, you don't see things the way they are, you see things the way you are. And I think for a documentary maker, that's a really important saying to keep in mind all the time, because it forces you, at least it forced me to all the time try to let go of my own context and perspective and see another way, and see what, if I didn't understand something, ask Ganza or Betty or Tedejek what it was, and sometimes it worked the other way around, and they confronted me with it. So I think this is a good saying to keep in mind when you film.
So I hope they wrote that down. Be aware of your perspective and identity. We don't see things as they are, but how we are. For you, Babah, what would be your advice for young storytellers, filmmakers who would want to work on films on Africa and Congo or other countries?
Well, I think every story starts with a question. What is the question? And you should be able to ask questions. I said it earlier on, like what Joris did when he was there, trying to hear them, ask the questions to them. Because sometimes coming from abroad, thinking that you have the solution, will just put you on the wrong path. So when you go there, be ready to ask questions and be ready to learn. And not the idea that you are going to teach the people there, but have it consciousness that you are going to learn. And when you have that perception, it will help you create a very wonderful story just by asking questions. And keep your stereotypes.
Open houding.
Yeah, keep your stereotypes and all
as
these other
say
things.
It in Dutch.
Houding. You see what?
An open houding, as we say it in Dutch. Have an open attitude. Yeah.
Attitude. I think that would be my advice to everybody who wants to make a story. Be ready to ask questions and be ready to listen.
Sorry for interrupting, Babah. It's because of the time, but I think it's about asking questions and not teach, but also be willing to learn. So for you, the honor, Isabel, to give us some words of wisdom for young storyteller filmmakers.
Oh, I think it's a sum up between what Joris has said, what Babah just said. The only thing I can add is that documentary is not the truth and it's not the reality. There's always somebody telling the story, making the decisions on the shots, on the visuals, and on what will end up in the edit. So consciousness, being conscious of that, of your own perspective, particularly when you go to make a film in a culture or a country that is totally different from yours. But as I said, I think it's Joris plus Babah plus this small last thing that sums up the advice.
With those beautiful words, we've come to the end of this webinar, Stop Filming Us Again. So we have learned that, yes, you can film us, but please with us, with our collaboration. I think that will be the conclusion of this evening. For me, I learned a lot, and I take one very specific question with me, especially for the audience of this webinar. How do we make sure that this kind of stories, this kind of conversations also reach the broader audience? And I think it's still a conversation. Decolonization is an ongoing process, and I think we all have steps to make. It was an honor to host this conversation. I wish you the last few days for this festival. If you didn't have your ticket, please have a ticket, and see you next time. Thank you.